Zoro and Sanji have fallen too far behind their captain to be proper wings to the Pirate King, but Elbaf is an arc about them closing that gap once again. This is the storyline where we're finally learning about the previous Pirate King's crew dynamic, where Roger, Rayleigh, and Gaban made up their own original monster trio, in a special tier of strength alongside Roger, and we're now even being shown that the two wings of the previous king were capable of every single form of advanced haki, from Conqueror's Coding to Future Sight, and that has made it all the more clear that Zoro and Sanji are not where they need to be. They need to be better. That is the message that is being stated directly in the story. And that is extremely exciting, because it confirms that Zoro and Sanji are definitely going to be getting stronger this arc. Luffy has already become a legendary figure known across the world. The next step is for Zoro and Sanji to begin to become more like Rayleigh and Gaban, and to begin carving their own legends and begin reaching the higher levels of haki mastery, just like their captain, because that is what wings are supposed to do. Let me break down the storylines that are set to play out for both Zoro and Sanji this arc, and how by the end of Elbaf they will once again be side by side with Luffy in strength, just as the monster trio is meant to be. But before we get into it, we know that Zoro and Sanji are going to be legends by the end of One Piece, but you can become a legend too in this widely popular game. I'm sure you've heard of Raid Shadow Legends, the sponsor of this video, but a lot of people don't know why it's so popular. Raid is widely regarded as having the best PvE experience of any mobile game. It is shockingly in-depth with campaigns, dungeons, and dungeon bosses. It also has AAA graphics, and I personally really enjoyed the speed at which everything opens up. Raid snowballs very quickly into unlocking new heroes, abilities, and dungeons very fast. And I personally love that I can play Raid on PC because it's cross-platform. And Raid really does have a faction for everyone, whatever your playstyle is. For example, because we're in Elbaf and One Piece, once known as the Island of Barbarians, in Raid you could play as the Barbarians, a class of champions all about raw power, warrior strength, and survival. So if you want to give Raid a try, then use my custom link below and you will start the game with a huge leg up, because right off the bat you will be gifted a huge starter pack and powerful champions. Make sure you do not use the App Store. Click the link in my description below or use the QR code, and you will get your massive starter pack that includes Ultimate Galek from the Orcs faction, and you can get the legendary Sun Priestess to Hanarok for free by using my promo code Desert Queen within 48 hours of downloading. And finally, at level 15, you'll also unlock Zargala, a heavy-hitting epic who melts enemies with AoE damage and debuffs. And for both new and existing players, there are 2 more promo codes in the description below that will get you even more loot and resources. So use my custom link and your promo codes, and come find me under the name Mr. Morge. So that aside, to begin with, from the beginning of Elbaf, Oda was hinting that Zoro and Sanji are still lacking as Luffy's right and left-hand men. Oda began with revealing detailed lore about how the Roger pirates actually functioned, and the key revelation was that Roger's crew had 2 fighters who stood shoulder to shoulder with him in battle, 2 supporting wings who were both legends in their own right. This immediately set a clear standard for what Zoro and Sanji would need to become for Luffy. But even as this dynamic was finally confirmed for Roger's crew, there was something that felt a little off about it, which was that Zoro and Sanji are both a long way off from becoming the legends that Rayleigh and Gaban became, and they are currently clearly too far off from Luffy's own strength to properly stand by his side in battle. Look at Egghead. Luffy is at a point where he can legitimately hold off multiple Admiral level characters at the same time, while Zoro had to go huff difficulty 1v1 for 20 chapters against Rob Lucci. And Sanji didn't even really fight anyone this arc and couldn't be relied on to hold off any top tiers for more than a single panel. The gap between Zoro and Sanji at Egghead to Luffy is huge, but what's more worrying is that the gap between Zoro and Sanji compared to Prime Rayleigh and Gaban is also huge. Rayleigh's feats in his prime were so great that literally East Blue Straw Hats had heard of him, and these guys didn't even know the names of the modern day Yonko in their primes. Garp himself considers Rayleigh to be the same tier of legend as Whitebeard, and supposedly Gaban was right up there with Prime Rayleigh in terms of strength, with his own legends like carving up a mountain to save the Pirate King. Compare this to Zoro and Sanji. We are in the final saga. The Straw Hats' time to make their legends is quickly coming to a close, and Zoro and Sanji still have done very little that will be spoken of 20 years in the future. Both in terms of strength and accomplishments, they are nowhere near their captain or the previous wings. Now, I know that some readers argue that, well, Zoro and Sanji are just supposed to be a lot weaker than Luffy, and Luffy has been far ahead of Zoro and Sanji ever since he got gears. But that's just straight up not true. Zoro and Sanji also got their own power-ups in Enies Lobby, meaning that they kept pace with Luffy's gears. Zoro one-shotted Kaku with Ashura, and Sanji two-shotted Jaibura with Diablo Janbei, meaning that while yes, Lucci was a lot stronger than Kaku and Jaibura, Zoro and Sanji post-power-ups are also a lot stronger than Kaku and Jaibura. If anything, Gear 2nd Luffy took much longer to defeat Blue Note than Ashura Zoro did with Kaku or Diablo Janbei Sanji did with Jaibura. And Blue Note is way weaker than Kaku and Jaibura. So at literally no point in Enies Lobby did Oda ever imply that Luffy is now magically far ahead of Zoro and Sanji. They were always portrayed as a trio pre-timeskip. We literally saw them all in action together again at the end of pre-timeskip, and they all had extremely similar performances against the Pacifista. I've also seen some readers argue that, well, even if the trio were all close pre-timeskip, well then the gap became a lot larger post-timeskip after Luffy came back with Gear 4th, and then Luffy also got Future Sight, and then even mastered multiple levels of Ryo. Except that's not true either, since when we got to the rooftop, it turned out that despite all of Luffy's power-ups, Zoro actually was very clearly still on the same level as Luffy, and Zoro arguably had better feats on the rooftop than anyone, including Luffy. So again, Luffy was not just way ahead of his subordinates during the post-timeskip. That is until the one moment where things did actually change, when Luffy unlocked Advanced Conqueror's Haki. From here on, over the course of the Kaido battle, Luffy simply got too many ridiculously strong upgrades back to back to back that finally left his wings in the dust. See, unlocking Advanced Conqueror's Haki, the most powerful ability in the series, was just the first step. Zoro was also starting to use Advanced Conqueror's Haki by the end of Wano as well, but the difference is that Luffy got to actually hone his Conqueror's Haki a lot more over the course of the Kaido fight. For example, initially, Luffy wasn't splitting the sky with Kaido, but by the time Luffy was knocked out and came back, in Luffy's second go-around, he had now already progressed his Conqueror's Haki coding to being able to split the sky with Kaido, implying Luffy had now reached Yonko tier. Zoro's Conqueror's Haki coding is definitely not at that level yet. But then on top of that, Luffy went a step even further and awakened his fruit. But it turns out it wasn't just any ordinary Devil Fruit awakening. Luffy's fruit turned out to be the most legendary fruit in existence that allows Luffy to warp reality and use basically unlimited abilities that are bound only by his imagination. Quite literally, in the span of a single fight, Luffy didn't just become a Yonko, he became a god. At that point, the gap suddenly became too big. Yes, Zoro and Sanji's respective power-ups in Wano put them above most Yonko commanders, but now Luffy had become way beyond commander level and was a full-fledged Yonko. Luffy getting too far ahead was inevitably going to happen at some point, because unlike pre-timeskip where all the Straw Hats would regularly get fights and progress, post-timeskip has largely been the Luffy show, where he keeps getting major fights and training arcs, while Zoro and Sanji, for the first 400 chapters of post-timeskip, exclusively got joke opponents, zero training, and were even written out of entire arcs. But thankfully, it seems like Oda was well aware of this entire time, because it was deliberate. Oda is aware that he's been giving Luffy too much love, and that it's time to catch the wings up. That's why Oda opened Elbaf by pointing out how great Roger's right and left-hand men were, and then showing us just how strong Roger's left hand, even far past his prime, still is. And then explicitly spelling out for us that Zoro and Sanji, as they are right now, are not proper standard bearers for what the Pirate King's right and left hand should be. And Gaban is absolutely right. I mean, Sanji is 500 chapters into the New World, and he still has literal basic armament and observation, and no conquerors. Sanji still hasn't even technically clearly shown the basic black coding level of armament. And what's funny is that Zoro fans are so proud of Zoro having Advanced Conqueror's Haki while Sanji doesn't, when in reality, Zoro is a f***ing joke in terms of Haki right now too. Zoro doesn't even know how to properly use his Conqueror's Haki, which means the final war is about to start and Zoro's not even as strong as Roger's number 3, who's 40 years past his prime. And on top of that, Zoro can't even use Future Sight at all, which is becoming an absolute basic standard at this point for any decent Haki fighter. In reality, Zoro right now isn't actually a great Haki fighter compared to the best. He's a one-trick pony and he doesn't even know how to properly do his one trick. But all of that roasting is just because we know that this situation is temporary. We know that Zoro and Sanji are going to catch up to Luffy because Oda is establishing that that is the point of the arc. The fact that Oda began Elbaf with a callback to a classic Monster Trio moment, the fact that Oda is using this arc to establish the importance of the Monster Trio dynamic in the previous Pirate King's crew, the fact that Oda is outright calling out Zoro and Sanji for not living up to the standard that they need to be at for Luffy, and the fact that above all else, Elbaf is clearly set to be an arc about the Straw Hat crew as a whole developing, all of this means that Zoro and Sanji will get a lot stronger by the end of this arc. So what is the next step for both of them? There are two clear steps forward for Zoro, at least one of which will certainly happen by the end of this arc. The first is that Zoro needs to develop Future Sight. Again, every single strong Haki fighter can use it, but most importantly, Zoro's final goal is Mihawk, who, considering his epithet Hawkeye and his highly observant nature, very likely has exceptional Future Sight. Mihawk would have to have that, considering his past duels with Shanks, who himself has the most impressive Future Sight in the story so far. By extension, this means Zoro absolutely has to have Future Sight of his own in order to compete against Mihawk. Considering even Gaban had Future Sight, at this point it no longer looks like Future Sight is something optional for Zoro, where it can just be chalked up to, well, observation isn't really Zoro's specialty, because advanced observation is simply the new standard for high-level Haki fighters. However, the more important improvement for Zoro will ultimately be Conqueror's Haki, and in particular, it's likely that this means Zoro mastering Ashura. See, Gaban established that Zoro can't use his Conqueror's Haki to the fullest unless Zoro realizes himself what he's doing and consciously aims to master it. Luffy also mentions that Zoro regularly leaks out Conqueror's Haki. This all sounds suspiciously similar to Zoro's most mysterious and unexplained ability, Ashura. So far, Zoro's greatest feat in the story was scarring Kaido with Ashura, something no one had achieved since Oden. Even Big Mom couldn't scar Kaido during their multi-day duel. And in this moment, Conqueror's Haki is clearly involved. Kaido makes that clear. Zoro doesn't know what he did, but that lines up with Gaban's own statement that Zoro doesn't realize his own Conqueror's Haki, and Luffy's statement that Zoro regularly leaks Conqueror's Haki without knowing it. Kaido had already been fighting Zoro for some time, but it was only when Zoro used Ashura that Kaido realized that Zoro is a Conqueror's Haki user, meaning that in this moment, Zoro certainly was using a Conqueror's Haki attack, and really only advanced Conqueror's Haki can even explain what Ashura is, as nothing besides Haki can explain this form. It is literally stated to be Zoro manifesting his own spirit after all. Most importantly, Zoro succeeded in scarring Kaido, which is implied to only be possible with an advanced Conqueror's Haki attack. I break this down in greater detail in this video, but the shortened version is that Oda makes it fairly clear through his repeated phrasing that advanced armament attacks are quote-unquote too shallow to deal serious damage to Kaido, and that only when advanced Conqueror's Haki is used can real damage be done. I've seen a lot of Zoro fans reject the clear implication that Zoro's Ashura attack on Kaido is advanced Conqueror's Haki, as it's more badass to say that Zoro did it with only armament, and that Zoro only began to use Conqueror's coding during the King fight, but that whole argument is pretty much out the window now that it's been confirmed that Zoro in general does not have conscious mastery over his Conqueror's Haki yet. It simply leaks out of its own accord. It's very clear that against Kaido, Zoro didn't know exactly what he did, just as he doesn't actually know what he's doing when he does King of Hell, just as he likely could have defeated Lucci earlier if he tapped into Conqueror's Haki right away. And this also explains why even this deep into the story, Oda still has kept hidden from us what Ashura actually is and how it works. Ashura has always been Zoro's strongest finishing move at every point in his journey, but it only comes out in the rarest situations for brief moments. The simple reason is because it is a product of Zoro's Conqueror's Haki, something Zoro can't control that simply leaks out at points. The King fight showed Zoro beginning to consciously bring out his Conqueror's Haki. The Ashura moment against Kaido showed us a glimpse of Zoro's peak potential with Conqueror's Haki, and now Gaban has confirmed that the final step for Zoro to bring it all together to reach that peak consistently is for him to understand how to control his Conqueror's Haki. When Zoro learns to master Conqueror's Haki, then and only then will he finally be able to use Ashura at will, and be able to fight using that power continuously. And considering that Zoro, with nearly every bone in his body broken, was still able to overpower and permanently scar Kaido with just a single Ashura attack, then if Zoro can fight an entire battle using Ashura, he would be absolutely broken. That is the level of strength that would make him comparable to his captain, the Pirate King, again. Now beyond Zoro, Sanji's situation is a bit more complicated. And back by popular demand, the World of One Piece poster collection is being made available again. The Villains collection is sold out, but every single island from the World of One Piece is available to get, all in fantastic minimalist art style, so you can complete your collection. All past deals are also available, so you can get any 2 posters you like and get another 2 free. You can get 15 posters at a major discount, or even the entire collection for a major discount. And if you complete the collection and have a poster of every island, then we will send you the final, exclusive, unlockable poster for free, the Moon. Just email us or tag me on Twitter with your photo of your collection so we can send you the Moon. So get your posters by hitting the link in the description below. With Sanji, the big question is, does he even have Conqueror's Haki? Well, to begin with, Sanji does not really fit the traditional mold of characters who have Conqueror's Haki. A lot of readers tend to mistake just being brave or having willpower as being prerequisites for Conqueror's Haki. Sanji is obviously brave and has willpower, but if that was all it took, then honestly a dozen One Piece characters each arc would have Conqueror's Haki. No, having Conqueror's Haki is a step further. It's a sort of transcendental level of willpower. The disposition of a king. A refusal to back down even if it's entirely irrational, because that level of will simply does not bend. A notable point of distinction was in how Sanji literally couldn't comprehend that Zoro would refuse to take even one step back with a knife piercing through his heart, because Zoro's will to prove that he was the strongest was simply that unbreakable, an act that made even Mihawk himself realize that Zoro had the potential to surpass him. It's the same reason that while Ace and Sabo were similar in strength as children, Ace would refuse to run when he had something to protect, whereas Sabo's initial instinct was to run away. And as we can see, Sabo still does that today. And so Ace was a Conqueror's Haki user, Sabo is not. It's the same reason that Law, while very brave and certainly willing to stand up and fight Yonko when needed, does not have the same level of absurd force of will that Luffy and Kid have, where when Kaido randomly dropped in front of Luffy and Kid for the first time, they both chose to challenge him immediately even though they were completely outclassed and were guaranteed to lose. Their conqueror spirit simply did not allow them to back down, whereas Law, in that very same situation, even with his crew's lives in danger, felt that a tactical retreat would be better and ran away. Yes, Law is still brave overall, Sabo is still brave, Sanji is still brave, and yes, they are smart to not be as uncompromisingly willful as Luffy, Zoro, Ace, and Kid. But it's no coincidence that they also don't have Conqueror's Haki. You can see this sort of consistency among the trios, wherein Luffy and his headstrong counterpart are Conqueror's Haki users, whereas the third member of the trio is also very strong and maybe more intelligent than the others, but is not a Conqueror's Haki user. Even if you just read about the way that Roger has been described, or how Whitebeard has been described, there's this common thread of a transcendental, almost absurd level of will that is associated with being a conqueror. When a conqueror decides to stand their ground, even if they're taking on unimaginable odds, they simply do not back down, and I don't believe Sanji has had many notable moments like that in the story, whereas Luffy and Zoro have many. If we're being truly objective, Usopp actually has significantly more moments like this than Sanji does, and Usopp also has more consistently notable feats of extreme willpower than Sanji does, as the Straws that generally fight through the most damage in their battles are Luffy, Zoro, and Usopp. However, am I saying that Sanji won't get Conqueror's Haki? I think that there is still a chance. I think it would be really harsh of Oda to tease Sanji getting it and then not following through. I think the fact that Gaban, Sanji's counterpart in the Roger Pirates, has it, is extremely encouraging for Sanji. And lastly, the fact that Oda kept Gaban's words to Sanji hidden could be a good sign as well that Oda has a surprise in store for Sanji. On top of that, one notable aspect of Sanji that could speak to a conqueror's spirit is that he very regularly accepts death. We've seen this with Kuma, we've seen this with Sanji destroying the raid suit and asking Zoro to kill him if needed, we've seen this with Sanji's famous thanks for the light moment, and so on. Now, this type of bravery is not the same as traditional Conqueror's Haki users, as again, Conqueror's Haki is not just about being brave. It's about unyielding displays of forceful and uncompromising will, characteristic of a king, whereas Sanji's moments of bravery tend to be more about willingness to sacrifice. Sanji is a very sacrificial character who will frequently choose to be a martyr and try to give up his own life to save someone else. Very brave and noble, but not a traditional conqueror. However, that's just based on the template of Conqueror's Haki that Oda has been showing us so far. It's entirely possible that this type of noble mentality that Sanji has will still end up fitting into the umbrella of what it could mean to be a Conqueror's Haki user. The definition is, after all, whatever Oda chooses to make of it. However, here's the thing. With Sanji, it ultimately doesn't matter if he gets Conqueror's Haki or not, because Sanji so far has had his own route of getting stronger despite not getting Haki upgrades like Luffy and Zoro. Sanji is a genetically modified human weapon. At the end of the day, the only thing that matters is getting stronger. How it happens is irrelevant. For the vast majority of characters, reaching the highest tier of strength does require Conqueror's Haki, but Sanji is already kind of in his own category. He's a science experiment much like the Seraphim, which opens the door for him to develop his own unique tools to get stronger. For example, Sanji's exoskeleton allows him to pull off feats that would normally require extreme Haki. His Ifrit Janbei is just as potent offensively as advanced armament attacks. It's entirely possible Sanji could just keep developing abilities that are unique to him that ultimately would allow him to keep up with Luffy and Zoro without their level of Haki. In fact, it's entirely possible that Oda came up with Sanji being a warrior of science, specifically because Oda didn't feel that Sanji's character made sense for having Conqueror's Haki, but Oda still wanted Sanji's strength to continue to scale with Luffy and Zoro, and so the concept of the warrior of science was born. Remember, in general, Sanji has always been a fighter who follows his own style rather than what is expected of him. From the very beginning, he was introduced to us as fighting without even using his hands, making him the only fighter in fiction that I know of that chooses to fight with only kicks. If from the very beginning Sanji was always an unorthodox fighter, maybe the equivalent of that in the endgame is Sanji becoming top tier without needing Conqueror's Haki. I do believe that Future Sight should still be in store for Sanji no matter what, as that is something that no amount of technological modifications can make up for. Gaban has Future Sight, and Sanji's own specialty is observation. Hell, if Sanji was able to catch a Future Sight user like Katakuri by surprise, then there is no reason Sanji shouldn't be able to develop his own Future Sight at some point, possibly even in Elbaf. At the end of the day, what matters is that both Zoro and Sanji will be taking a huge leap forward in Elbaf to catch up with Luffy, because that is the standard that they are supposed to uphold as the wings of the new Pirate King, and that is what Oda has been highlighting over and over again throughout the arc. This will be the storyline where they close the gap that has developed between them and their captain since Onigashima. So let me know in the comments below what you think Zoro and Sanji's upgrades will be in this arc, and whether you think Sanji will get Conqueror's Haki. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like and subscribe, and if you want to hear how the Strahd's growth in Elbaf is a direct parallel to Thriller Bark, then you can listen to my weekly podcast that just dropped by becoming a member or by supporting me on Patreon, link in the description below. And don't forget to use my Raid Shadow Legends link in the description below to get insane bonuses for new players with 2 epic champions.